guys, so the how we stem from economics, and societal economics is also a thing. There's a education, mainly using in the education sector. As I mentioned to you, how in my Commonwealth project we were looking at the well-being of children, school going children, and how COVID had impacted their well-being to a certain extent. So the economics of happen, and this is my LinkedIn profile, by the way. You guys can send me a request, and I'll add you. And Raphael will share other details as well. But this is just to, and I'll be sharing this document as well. And there's another document which I didn't want to scare Raphael before the talk, so I didn't share it early on. But I will share it all with you, looking at how much you are interested in this, developing economics and the field of economics of happiness.
Yeah.
All, yeah. Should I start? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is it all starts with, remember I said Easterlin paradox. So it stems from Richard Easterlin, who was a thinker in 1906. And before that, so a key thinker has been Richard Easterlin, who got the economics of happiness to the forefront of economic thinking and development economics. But before him also, there were scholars like John Stuart Mill, who mentioned that how it is one's duty to maximize overall happiness, and not just look at policies from a technocratic approach, right? 1861, this was John Stuart Mill. He was a philosopher. 1932, Simon Kuznets. Now, I'm pretty sure, like not in first year, but by second year, you will be aware of, Simon Kuznets, where the Kuznets curve, you will be knowing how the Kuznets curve is used in inequality and income. And, he published his first national income accounts for the US, based purely on conventional economic variables. So this also made also the critiques of using just traditional economic variables and not including variables like happiness, unpaid care work, and all these things which impacted the GDP. But they never included it, so it always led them to think more and research more on how to create indexes which were holistic in their approach, right? After Easterlin, so this is before Easterlin, this is after Richard Easterlin. In 1997, British economists argued that joblessness is the main reason for unhappiness, and rightly so. I mean, a lot of people, there was, I mean, the financial crisis came on much later on, but there was in the 90s there was a huge reform. If you look at political economics, IMF was giving there were structural adjustment programs happening in African countries and in India per se. Like in India, the liberalization reforms happened in 1991. So I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty in the economy, and all these economies who were following who actually had taken IMF loans, and to give back those loans, IMF put a condition that you implement structural adjustment programs in your countries. And a lot of, and in Africa also, like I'm pretty sure, so there's a book called, where I'll just write it on the chat box so that I don't forget to give it to you later. There is okay, one sec. Is there no sound? Someone just wrote on the chat box. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. I guess the sound is not connected.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I-
you are audible.
Okay, I'm audible, right? Oh.
Yeah.
One sec, I was writing the name of the. So there's a book called Dead Aid. So it's by an economist, and it talks about how aid in Africa, all these structural adjustment programs that happened, they didn't really help the economies come up. I mean, they put them into further debt traps. And yeah, I'll just start sharing my screen again, because I just read from Frederick. He said there's no sound, so I just Raphael, I'm audible, right? Right? Raphael, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Cool. So I'll go back to sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying after Easterlin, like, the paradox was already set in economists' mind. Like, they knew there was something lacking in GDP estimations all over the world, right? And then British economist Andrew Oswald also argued that, you need to account for unhappiness, because most of these, I mean, everybody, like even in your first year, I remember this graph stuck in my mind in my first class of microeconomics. It's called the trade-off graph between leisure and work, right? So if you go towards the work axis, your leisure has to decrease, and like vice versa. So there's a trade-off. So obviously happiness is correlated, right? So 2005, this was something really nice because he published, so he revisited the debate, the Easterlin paradox that I spoke about, that when your income increases, your happiness not necessarily increases. And British economist Richard Layard published something like, as I said, in research, if you publish something, more people read about it, and you revisit debates, which, further piques your curiosity. So this paper is called Happiness Lessons from a New Science. And again, going back to, our first discussion during the Zoom call, was that economics is both an art and a science, but art is more towards the philosophical side, which also I'll come back to. But this was proper data and proper variables where he said that, the Easterlin paradox might be true after all. So brief overview. So this was just like to give you a timeline, because all these thinkers you can go back to and revisit. I mean, John Stuart Mill is one of my favorites, and even Adam Smith. Adam Smith came with the theory of moral sentiments. It's not here in this doc, but I have another reading list which I'll share with Raphael. You should read that, because Adam Smith is actually the father of economics, but he's into a lot of philosophy. Coming back to brief overview, as I said, GDP, a lot of variables, social variables per se, are not included. So the aim is to maximize income and not, maximize happiness and not income. So this is one of the newest, like, after Bhutan, a lot of countries and international multilateral organizations have started, measuring the happiness variables. So this is the Happy Planet Index. I earlier mentioned in our earlier chat box the Gross National Happiness Index, that you should look for Bhutan, who Bhutan's government uses it extensively. This is by a think tank called the New Economics Foundation. It in 2006. It's quite recent, by the way, but you can still check it out, because they came up with like ranks, and like, they had a good three measurement variables. So they looked at life expectancy, where you have the birth rates, death rates, and then individual well-being, and the environmental impact of people's consumption. Now in 2006, this is something really important, because of earlier, climate change was considered to be a hoax, but now that countries have signed the Paris Agreement, and they've taken, I mean, US has gone back to it. So it's climate change, environment became an important variable. Like even while I was doing my first ever, undergrad economics internship with the Ministry of Power, they actually came up with energy efficient bulbs, for rural India. So which made me realize that even the ministries are investing a lot of resources into energy efficiency for the climate, right? Because it impacts people consumption. And they saw this, after my internship, Delhi was trying to become all solar, like a solar city. And the government gave subsidies, they made people incentivized. So incentives is a very important part of behavioral economics. So when the government and the state intervenes, right, so they give you subsidies to, so that it impacts people's consumption. As I said, earlier, remember I was telling Rafa, like, you should use nudge theory, you should use effective nudges. So now the government, so this environmental impact was very important to be considered in any index, because the government is spending fiscal resources, right? So it's affecting your fiscal policy, monetary policy. So yeah, so these are some of the so these are the sub regions, and they have done it country wise. But this graph, so I took this graph to put on the brief. But as you can see, like, Central America, they have like subgroup regions according to their income levels, and then overall, they have produced an overall score for the HPI index. Coming to challenging the Easterlin, paradox, because this talk started with how you came up with, economics of happiness, but there was a direct challenge to the concept of GDP, right, provided by Easterlin in way back in 1974. So how it came about? So people uh, Kofi was asking me, how do we know what we want to do? Even if you're interested into monetary economics, you can just help with the surveys, and you can do the fiscal part of policy making as well. So economics teaches you that, right? I mean, you will be learning if you're in your first year. In your second year, you will be running regressions using game theory models. So even Easterlin, for that matter, looked at surveys of people's reported happiness in 19 countries. Okay, and again, I will emphasize, while I was researching for the Commonwealth project last year during the pandemic, reported happiness is way, way different from subjective well-being and perceived happiness. So in your data points, you need to those variables where you have the dummy variables and everything. So you need to take into the account the fact that happiness is very subjective. Your happiness might be materialistic. My happiness might be related to spiritual well-being. There's in Commonwealth, I mean, I was really happy that I did that project. So there's a thing called subjective well-being. Great. So this was our topic for intersectionality. And then there was a thing called hedonic also. And I have read I've been I've read Da Vinci Code and everything. So I was like, what do they exactly mean by hedonic? So there is these terms, spiritual well-being. So you really need to be careful while measuring that. Is it perceived? Is it reported happiness? So you have to take into fact those inconsistencies or externalities as well. Coming back to the subject, so these are the types of well-being. If you're interested, our Commonwealth paper will be published this month, where I'm a co-author with so you should actually check her also out. I mean, I'll write this in a mail and give you feedback, whoever you can check and read more. So I did this with Dr. Talia Esnard. She teaches at University of West Indies, and she's a behavioral scientist. Again, she's not from in. So coming back to something that Kofi said really stuck with me, what to do, right? You can even pursue eco-socio. You can convert your economics degree into something sociological if you want. If you're interested, again, it all bogs down to what are you interested in, right? So she's she's a department chair of behavioral sciences at the University of West Indies, and she's a sociologist by training, but she was interested into capability approach, which is given by economists. So in that paper, we do talk about capability approach given by Amartya Sen. I know his name pops up again and again. I mean, I told you about how he was a philosopher, and also in this paper, in this brief also, I've written about him because he does a happiness report for the French government as well, which I'll come in 5 minutes. So just check the capability approach by Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum. They are both economists, but it is used a lot in behavioral sciences and a lot in considering when you're considering well-being. So capabilities approach, if you research, and you can come back to me because I can't share the paper right now, the Commonwealth one, because it's going to get published and we'll get digital credentials, but I will share it with you, all the link, once it's published, right? I'll share it with you. You can read this. You can contact Dr. Talia Esnard. She's a very, very, approachable professor. So capabilities approach actually talks about functionings, in the economy. Like, why are poor people poor? Like, is it because they lack just the income? Again, it just does not walk down to the income, right? It may be they have the capability, but it's not being enhanced, or they are not functioning. So functioning is something that Sen, focuses on in his book. And there's also a book that he took out, The Idea of Justice, right? I mean, this leads to happiness because so idea of justice. So it would be very different. Your definition of development might be very different from my definition of development, right? So Development is Freedom is another book where he talks about basically the capability approach was first talked about in his book by Amartya. I'm just writing Amartya Sen, like you'll understand. So this book basically, makes you ponder that even development economics as a field it's not defined properly. So what is development, right? For me, it might be purely in the education sector, where I'm considered with, giving functionings and capabilities to the bottom of the income pyramid, to, get them, uplift them. But then development for some people might be like, there's a thing called south south cooperation, where all these developings are so this is what I did in MEA, in the Ministry of External Affairs internship. We were given how, like, I had to assess how much aid was coming in India, how much aid was India giving to other foreign countries. And we saw that India Africa in the partnership was really robust, because whenever India wanted a loan, Africa was there. But Africa aid, like India contributed to a lot of infrastructure projects in Africa. So it might not be just be financial aid, right? Again, there might be functionings that you might be enhancing in those countries, and capabilities, rather than just providing them with money. So going back to Dead Aid, which I wrote on top of the chat box, Dead Aid is a book by an African economist, and she talks about how, the aid which you're giving all these countries under the garb of South-South cooperation, or the triangular cooperation, where a rich country intervenes, it's not really uplifting the people. So here I will again, so the aid problem is not solved, right? I mean, you're giving, so that's why, I mean, the title is a bit funny, Dead Aid. I mean, the aid is going, the flows are happening in the balance sheet of the country. So in economics, you will, in international, so this is your third year paper, and you are first years, but you can get interested in it from, right now. International trade theory says that once you give aid to people, like their flows, inflows, outflows, you will be studying countries' balance sheets, so you will see the money is coming in, but where is it being used? So there's a my master's actually professor, my thesis advisor, gave me this AAA principle to, like, assess whether development is actually happening or not. I'm typing, so while I'm talking, you can take a look at the chat box and, like, take these notes down. I'll give you the brief as well. So there's a thing called affordability, accessibility, and awareness. Okay, I mean, these things sound very basic. To be honest, in my first year undergrad, if someone told me accessibility, affordability, awareness, I'd be like, oh, yeah, yeah, everybody knows that. But while doing the book, while actually calculating, measuring variables, you'll understand that, these three principles are not adhered to. And then under the garb of development, you're saying, oh, we made a, we did infrastructure and everything, but like nothing development, like people's happiness, people's well-being hasn't been uplifted. So this is something, the AA principle, that you need to keep in mind while assessing the variables. Going back to the, technical, because right now also, when Easterlin first pointed out happiness, other economists were like, listen, happiness is so subjective. I don't think we can, measure it. And this was way back in the 1970s, where people were just looking, I mean, the financial crisis hadn't happened. So you had all these investment banks, JP Morgan, you had a banking kind of a definition of, economics. That's why development economics makes much more sense in the era of the pandemic, post 2008. I mean, you even in banks, there's a CSR component in all these big corporates, the big tech corporations. So happiness then becomes a, because if you're, and I'm pretty sure there was this so there was this partner of mine in the Commonwealth Research. She's a mental health educator in Antigua, okay, and she works with corporates and the government on mental health education. So, I mean, she was also in my Commonwealth group, and I asked her, "Listen, do you in well-being? Do you think we should incorporate mental health?" She was like, "Why not? Won't it come in subjective happiness?" And then I started reading papers on, mental health and happiness, and definitely had a correlation. And people had done regression analysis, which even, like, I was like, oh wow, so people have measured your capabilities in terms of well-being and, access to education. Going back to the, okay, so yeah, so he did, he did conduct his surveys, and for the, and for the previous 3 decades. So if people say that, it all started in, I mean, he did have previous data, because in economics, I'm pretty sure your professors will tell you that, while you're conducting research and all, your data points should be like minimum, there must be certain variables. You can't just take a small, because again, there'll be sample bias, right? If you're taking a small sample, I mean, why do you think randomized controlled trials are, criticized? Because they say that that can't be extrapolated. So there's a problem of external validity. Like, I'm using some technical terms, but I'm pretty sure once you read about it, you'll get to know. So in economics, this is for people who are interested in, like, measuring the variables. Because my last talk, when I was talking about the care economy, a lot of undergrads asked me how, okay, this is all fine, we understand the social aspect of it, but how do you measure, how do you conduct what you're saying in practice on the ground, right? So randomized controlled trials, are RCTs. I mean, Esther Duflo, and you can read about it on JPAL's website. Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee got the Nobel for this exact thing. So for them, the variable was, poverty. And like, Poor Economics is a book. You should read that as well. That was in my development economics course in Xavier's. So if someone is interested in, so here they didn't work on happiness, but this is something that they use. This technique is something that they use. But people say, again, the surveys need to be robust. It needs to follow a time series pattern, because you might have the problem of, so external validity is something in statistics as well. I'm pretty sure if you're in your second year, you must be doing this while studying. But again, I think, after economics, as Kofi and another other person asked me what to do, what are the advantages. I think these are the like, that's why I said, like, let me start my talk, because you'll see a lot of scope right now. What I'm using, it's foreign policy, it's Poor Economics is a book, I mean, where they use it in, like, studies where you are looking at the idea of justice, development, and behavioral sciences as well. Coming back, so this is basically measuring happiness. I told you Amartya Sen will come again. I mean, so look at this. So this was this dream team, okay, and like, which happened in, you know 2007, where Nicolas Sarkozy's government. So I was intrigued in this because, again, I was reading Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz. So I'm pretty sure, I don't know in Ghana, but in Delhi University, and like, I've studied in India, right? The undergrad. Stiglitz's book is like a Bible. I mean, it's a course book, right? Like Stiglitz and Waltz and everything. So Stiglitz is a great economist if you want to read about macroeconomic theory. And like, he was an advisor. So he's quite like prominent with the governments and the state. So he, along with Amartya Sen, and I'm pretty sure why they call Amartya Sen was because I told you, right, he already wrote his book on development as freedom, where he spoke about capability, approach, and happiness. So all these economists came together to investigate, like, the measurement and, to look. So it's a very long report, though. I mean, it was published in 2009. It took them 2 years. It is like a 243 pages, I think. I mean, I tried to read it, but I couldn't read the whole thing. But you get the gist that basically they wanted to shift the focus of economic policy making from measures of economic production. As I said, right, the measuring GDP was quite technocratic in its approach. So they did that to the measure of well-being and sustainability. And again, if you want to read, you should read the so I'm interested in books. Like, my sister used to complain how I don't read fiction and stuff, but I was interested in books. But my first book that I actually read the whole thing was Freakonomics. I was like, what is this free, like, the name, got to me. But yeah, so you should read economics. I mean, if you are undergrads, like, you took economics for a reason, right? I mean, right now you might not know if you're going into finance, banking, or development, but I'm pretty sure you are interested in offering what economics is, as an art or a science. So you should read The Age of Sustainable Development by Jeffrey Sachs. I actually have it on my back. I'm on my table right now because I'm going to work with the University of Geneva on climate finance. So he actually talks about, oh no, I have another book. So that, okay. Okay, I'm writing it in a chat box, but again, please, like, Raphael will remind me, I will share these resources with you. Sachs also wrote a book called, this is on my table because I was reading about climate, oil and gas industry. I have to research some things. So I had this book because he's my favorite. So yeah, so I was saying, going back to, like, if you have time, I mean, someone asked me, like, it gets really boring. It gets really, it does get, I know you want to give up economics in the very second year of doing it, but I would suggest that, hang in there, read these books, because see, again, the books have this book that I'm writing right now in the chat box has pictures, like, the planet pictures and everything. So I mean, if you're interested, just spend your time doing this. I mean, wait a second. And Insta, follow the Economist pages. I follow WSG. So this is the book, Commonwealth Economics for a Crowded Planet. Okay, like this. So basically, it's he was an environmental economist, and like all these books that he's written is that, you have to look at well-being and sustainability. So Sachs is someone who comes in here. He so basically all these, his whole book is about, securing our water needs and a home for all species. I mean, he gets science into really scaring you that, only economics won't get you the right results. You need to look at sustainable economics, right? Coming back, this all you can read. Okay, this is also interesting. So I gave an example of Bhutan, right, to you in the first meeting, where I told you the king was interested with dances, and then he was like, why don't we create a national gross national happiness index, right? So Bahamas also did something similar. So these are just countries who have been doing this, like, because they were interested in knowing the well-being of their citizens. Other capitalistic nations, I mean, Jeffrey Sachs is an American economist, right? So he did it for the US government. Sarkozy was a lot interested in, like, knowing what the French government could do to make well-being a part of policy making. And the people, so apparently satisfaction with life. So there are a lot of indexes, by the way. So if anybody is interested in measurement, they can contact me, and, like, because I'm also figuring it out after the Commonwealth project. I mean, I was really intrigued with, so Dr. Talia was from a sociology background, right? So she was finding difficulty with the measurement. She understood the concepts and she gave us readings, but I, like, really liked the capability approach by Amartya Sen. And then all these indexes are using his, theory to some extent to, like, you know come up with indexes and the measurement of the variables. So this is called satisfaction with life index. It was and this is by a psychologist. So are you seeing the, like, initial talk where I said that eco can branch out to varied things? It could make you go crazy, but it would also make you open up to a lot of like a paradigm shift, right? So you can even, like, I don't know, you can, so Dal I mean, hires psychologists and economists, eco people who can, in the HR, design thinking is a new thing which is coming up. So you can actually use eco psychology to do design thinking. So I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I remember Raphael telling me that these are undergrads; they don't really know what to do with economics. So I would suggest, like, I found my calling in policy and development economics. You could also look at design thinking and eco psychology, right? I mean, if you're interested in that, but it all has to come down from, again, guys, the talk that you have to narrow down your focus, right? So here, so coming back to, so the people, so he came up with how to measure feelings of well-being. Okay, and I mean, this is the end, don't worry, I'm not going to take much time. Andrew Oswald, remember, he came in before. I'll just show you where he came in. He was a thinker who came after the Easterlin paradox. And this is the guy I'm telling you, in 1997, the whole IMF crisis and the SAP programs, he was the one who argued joblessness for being the main reason for unhappiness. So I'm ending the session with a quote by him. So economic things matter only insofar as they make people happier, right? So this is again British economist guy. I mean, this would, like, these things have value, right? There was also one more thing. It was a personal thing that my principal told me at Stephens. I remember we were bunking classes for some other project work only, and he told us, "I'll just wait. I'll just first I'll ask you questions about this, and then end it with a quotation." For this, there are debates and discussions post-COVID era. So if anybody has resources, I can send you the Commonwealth paper for this particularly, which when it'll get published, because we focused on socio-emotional learning, right? Because it was about the well-being of small, like school children in Africa. You can also look at Karl Marx, and he has a paper on this. Like, Karl Marx, again, he's a German philosopher, economist, whatever you call, Paul scientist. I mean, he's everywhere. You study Paul science, he's a scholar. Eco also Marxian economics, he's a scholar, right? So Crisis of Education is a really small paper, like I think 4 or 5 pages. So it's a paper, you can read that. And yes, I'll stop sharing now. This document, I'll tell Raphael to make it available. Raphael, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. So I'll certainly make it available to them via our platforms.
Yeah.
Hello, madam.
Hi, Kofi. If you want to say something?
Yeah.
Oh,
What about your info? I mean, how to get connected to you?
how to get connected to me? Yeah. So Raphael will share my
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Yes, my LinkedIn has my Gmail ID. You can get connected to me on WhatsApp if you use that, or LinkedIn and Gmail. You can mail
Yeah,
me.
I'm using WhatsApp.
Oh, great. So my WhatsApp number is different. My number, Raphael has it. He connects with me there. And you can mail me also, because I have my mail in my phone. So I keep checking my mails. I'm going to mail all of these things to Raphael after the session. And I have so yeah, guys, my code, it was really, it really affected me in the sense that I knew after Stephens, I had to do masters at LSE or do social policy, or I don't know, get into the development sector. So I was, my mom is also here. She knows this incident. So by the name Preeti, I changed my name in the first. Wait, this is my sister's laptop so that people don't get confused. So yeah, so my professor, so we were bunking classes, and I'm pretty sure before this, I think there was Nancy or someone else. Someone told me, Raphael told me that, it gets a lot. Eco gets a lot on your schedules and everything in first year itself. I was bunking classes in my second year end because I had gotten a research fellowship. So if University of Ghana has research fellowships, or I don't know how your structure is, if you have societies, you should join that as well, because it gives you exposure apart from the textbooks. So I was bunking classes to do the project work, not for any other reason. But I didn't attend the lectures. They give you I'm pretty sure. Raphael, do you have attendance in your university? Like they must be giving you attendance, right?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So there's a minimum threshold that you can't, cross. So my principal called us all eco students, in our second year, and he told us that you economists, and he's from an English, so our principal was from a literature background. So he was like more into philosophy and literature, and I don't know, Robert Frost and stuff. So he gave us a quotation, like he quoted, and he was like, "I will ground you. I'll give you punishment. I might even suspend you, but I would like to leave you." I would like to leave you with a quote, and which should remain with you your life. And it has, and I mean, I should thank him. But so the quotation was, I'll write it also. So he said, "You economist, okay, young budding economist." I mean, he added his flair of the language. I'll just go down to the quote. Economist, no, and there's some economist has only said this, by the way. It's a prop. And we searched it. We were like, is he coming up with this, or is it an actual quote? It's an actual quote. Economists know the price of everything, okay, because we try to measure everything, demand, supply, basic. This is your first year economics, guys, trade-offs and scarcity and all. So economists know the price of everything. And then he emphasized the word value, and he said the value of nothing. And first we were like, oh my god, is he like serious? Is he saying that to our face? And he said that, if you continue with this behavior or lacking in your undergrad, you'll never know the value of anything. So yeah, so I'm not scaring you while ending the session, but I would suggest that before starting the session, what I suggested was, like, build the right social networks. I mean, this is Marxian economics. Like, build the right social networks, narrow down what you want to do. And, like, Nancy told me, like, she wants to, like, definitely, Nancy, you can get in touch with me and tell me what your areas of interest are, because also it depends on your professors. So in my Stephens undergrad, my finance professor in the second year was really good. So I got interested in variables and financial derivatives and, cash flow analysis. In my third year, the subjects were all boring, to be honest. Like, Indian economy made me sleep because it was all history. It was the Indian economic device. So, I mean, there were subjects which got to me, okay. But there was one professor who was really good. So he was making it was again, Dev Econ and international economics. So trade theory, like we had, so I'm pretty, Raphael, do you have game theory right now? No.
Currently, I don't really know, but I think it might be done
I
in
think it
some of
comes
the
in the
levels.
later part of second year. Yeah, it comes in the. So once I'm pretty sure you should, Kofi, you should hang in there.
Yeah,
Like,
the game theory. Yeah, we do have it. We do have the game theory.
oh, you have.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
should again game theory. Please check out videos. Like, I don't know. I'll give you. I learned game theory by online videos. Like, I did not. I mean, Prisoner's Dilemma really got to me, and I wanted to solve more such this thing. And international trade theory, you use game theory to come up with the right, which country will trade, which country will back out. I mean,
Yeah.
Paris Agreement was already predicted. This is really interesting because everybody knew US will back out. It was a game theory model. Will US back out of
Yeah.
the Paris Agreement? Yeah, no, I'll like so watch these videos. They make economics fun.
Yeah.
And as I said, my first ever book was Freakonomics. I mean, I was a freak to buy that, but it was a really good book. Again, it gave you like, I mean, these
Okay.
books can give you much more knowledge than a 1 hour webinar with me. To be honest, I can be a resource person to direct you to this bibliography and tell you what interested me. But once you narrow down your focus, you can contact me, and I'll tell. Even though Raphael, I mean, it's your birthday, right? Is it your
Yeah.
birthday? Was it yesterday or is it still today? I'm confused with the time zones.
It's today. Today. But I
Oh
think,
yes,
yeah, it's today.
but still he's hosting a webinar, guys. So I think that counts for something. Like, he's taking the beyond the classroom experience, that too globally.
Yeah.
So yeah, Raphael will get in touch with you. He'll forward my details, and uh, yeah, definitely. A lot of people are
Yeah.
texting privately. Yeah, no, but guys, you don't have to text me privately on Zoom. I'll definitely, Raphael, please share them today. I'll just mail you my everything in one mail so that I'll make it easier for you, and then you can share these documents with them as well.
Yeah, yes, I'll certainly do so. I'll share it across the platforms and the record links in the YouTube format as well.
Yeah.
Also the
Thank you
slide
so much.
as well for a review.
Anyone else has any question? And Marilyn, I want your DP, man. Like, I really like your "There's no storm" and like "Never give up." Guys, more than me, I think for motivation, you should contact Marilyn. She has a really nice
Yeah,
and like on Zoom, yes. So I would also love to get in touch with you, and like there are